Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Back today with a bit of a Patreon request. When we're on the subject of Patreon, let me give a big shout out to our channel sponsors, Fine Web Design. Please do check out the link to their website, which is in the description box below. Their support is much appreciated, so please do check out their website. But today's Patreon request, bit of a left field one, and kind of goes along the lines of who needs enemies when you got friends like these, if you like. But the Patreon request essentially is for me to make a video about some of my worst picks since starting the YouTube channel. Now, my theory and philosophy has always been that if you're going to have a YouTube channel where you put thoughts about the sport of boxing out, and crucially, if you're going to make predictions on fights, then before you do that, you should make your peace with the fact that you can't get every fight right. Certainly, there's been periods of time when I've been doing this channel where it kind of felt like I couldn't get any fight right. And you are, of course, going to get fights wrong and get a little bit of well-natured stick for it. So I'm cool with that. When I get a fight wrong, I try not to be someone who defends a bad pick or who takes it personally. My attitude, whenever possible, is just to put my hands up and say, look, one of them things. You know, I don't claim to be an expert or anything like that. And yeah, there's some good picks. There's certainly been some bad picks. So when I was having a little think about which ones to include in this video, and I'm sure some helpful people in the comments section will be able to come up with their own thoughts as to my worst picks and my most memorable bad picks since when I've started this YouTube channel. I'm not necessarily going to go purely on fights that I've necessarily got wrong. I'm also going to talk about fights where I've had certain thoughts on how the fight would turn out that I've got wrong. I'm also going to talk about one or two boxing bets that I've put on that have been absolute calamities, you know, and made me have a good look in the mirror. I mean, let's start with a few, and these are not in necessarily a particular order. These are just ones that sort of sprung to mind. I had a good think about it. I didn't go through every pick I've ever made on the channel, but I had a good think about it. So let's start with one that is dear to my heart. The rematch, Tony Bellew versus Nathan Cleverly, the second fight. I was utterly convinced going into the matchup that it was a Cleverly win. In fact, I thought Cleverly would win with a good bit in hand. Regular viewers will know that I'm something of a Nathan Cleverly superfan. But combined with that was the fact that I just thought Tony Bellew had gaping flaws in his game. And to be honest, these are consistent themes throughout the time that I've been running the channel. Me massively overrating Cleverly and me massively underrating Tony Bellew. So I guess this one sort of stood out in my memory because it goes down as a bit of a painful loss because I guess I was quite invested in Cleverly winning the fight. Really, you know, I think I did an extended pre-fight analysis where I talked about how Cleverly would make out into a good cruiserweight, how Cleverly's jab would cause Tony Bellew all sorts of problems, how Bellew's defensive ineptitude would, you know, be his undoing against the master Nathan Cleverly. And as we now know, we retreated to one of the worst fights that's ever graced our TV screens, and we retreated to a fight that Tony Bellew definitely won. Now, it actually ended up, in terms of the judges' scorecards, it actually ended up being a relatively competitive decision, but I don't think there's too many of us who would say that Tony Bellew didn't deserve to win that fight. And even as an ardent Nathan Cleverly fan, I have to admit Tony Bellew was the better man on the night. So when I think back to some of my most painful picks, that one certainly stands out as one of my more painful picks. And Tony Bellew, certainly someone who has caused me all sorts of grief since starting this channel because of someone who I massively underestimated. When we're on the theme of me underestimating fighters, I'm now going to move it on to the two reigning heavyweight champions of the world, Joshua and Wilder, because those are both guys who I definitely underestimated when they were coming up through the ranks. I grew up, I guess, and I started doing boxing and watching boxing and making boxing videos just after the David Price era. I guess I'd been sitting there as a casual fan, watching Audley Harrison's career develop, watching David Price's career develop, and seeing those careers end in disappointment. And I guess, in many ways, watching the careers of Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua develop has taught me something as a boxing fan, because when I watched those guys early on, I thought they were just too raw and too lacking in certain attributes to make them into great heavyweight champions. I believe that Deontay Wilder was too lacking in technique to beat the top guys. I believe that Joshua early on was too stiff, too robotic to beat the top guys. And in my head, I did unfairly, in hindsight, write those guys off. I underestimated them, and it's probably because, as I say, for me, it was probably a hangover of the sort of Audley, David Price days, and then I looked at these two and I thought, okay, here we go again, exactly the same type of hype job, Olympians, etc. So when it came to those guys stepping up, I actually picked against both of them. So I picked against Anthony Joshua when he fought Dillian Whyte. I picked Dillian Whyte to win the fight. And I picked against Deontay Wilder when he stepped up to world title level against Bermane Stiverne. In hindsight, both of those fights were won conclusively. Yes, Stiverne was the first person to take Wilder the distance. Yes, Dillian Whyte was the person who first took a round off Anthony Joshua, if you like. But having said that, when you look back at those two fights, those were conclusive defeats for the guys that I picked. Now, funnily enough, whilst I didn't pick Charles Martin to beat Joshua, and whilst I certainly didn't pick Audley Harrison to beat Deontay Wilder, I did actually bet on those results because of a pure value play. I remember seeing Deontay Wilder coming over, fighting away from home as a young heavyweight, hadn't really fought anyone, and I remember thinking, Audley, he's still got a little bit left in the tank. He's still got that prize fighter, day against him. And I actually had a little bet on Audley to beat Deontay Wilder. I actually bet on Tony Thompson to beat David Price in both Tony Thompson fights. So I got Tony Thompson, I think, at something like stupid, like 14-1 first time round. And I got Tony Thompson at something, again, stupid, like 7-2 or 4-1 in the rematch. And I think I was looking for a repeat of that. I think I was thinking more experienced heavyweight, been in there, got that age under his belt, going up against a prospect who's just flawed in several ways. And, from a betting perspective, I don't think I wanted to go into the bookmakers for a month after placing that one for fear that people would remember that I had a bet on Audley to beat Deontay Wilder. So, look, if you'd asked me before the fight, gun to your head, who's going to win, I would have told you that Wilder's going to win. I actually came out and picked Joshua to beat Martin on the channel. But at the same time, loving a bit of value from a gambling perspective, I had a little wager on both of those ones. So those were painful losses. They weren't painful losses financially because they weren't notable bets. It's just a value play. But it was painful from an ego perspective. Because I made all this case, Charles Martin, he's a southpaw, he's awkward. It's a big step up for Joshua. It's the first time he's going in with a live body. And it was just the manner of the defeat. The same way if you look at Wilder versus Audley. it's just the manner of the defeat was a crushing blow to the ego. Let me think of a few more for you, just going off the top of my head here. I picked David Price to beat Christian Hammer. Like, a lot of people on my channel commented saying all over Christian Hammer, this is the bet of the century. I was actually at that fight. It was so painful to see it unfold by ringside, to see that happen to Big Pricey. I picked Frankie Gavin to beat Sam Eggington. And that was a confident pick. That was a pick expecting Frankie Gavin to win really with a bit in hand. I thought Sam Eggington was just too young, too inexperienced, too poor to beat a guy like Frankie Gavin. I think next time out I was again, made the same mistake and picked Paulie Malignaggi to beat Paulie Malignaggi to beat Sam Eggington. So, both times there, Sam Eggington, another fighter who's exposed my poor picking not once but twice. Those were bad ones. I guess more recently, it's one that I look back at in hindsight and think, how on earth did I make this mistake? I mean, I know I wasn't the only one who made the mistake, but nevertheless. More recently, I picked Eubank to beat George Groves. And it's one of them with the benefit of hindsight, looking back at that, you're thinking, how on earth did anyone pick Eubank to beat Groves? Groves was always the better boxer. Groves always had the better fundamentals. Groves was always bigger. Groves always hit harder. Groves always had the better jab. Groves had always been tested at higher levels. With the benefit of hindsight, it's so obvious that Groves was going to beat Eubank. But there were many of us, certainly including myself, who bought into the hype. And bought into that hype despite the fact that Billy Joe Saunders had exposed it somewhat earlier on in the career. So that was a painful one. Again, I bet on Eubank for that one. Because of the way the prices developed on that one, I was able to kind of... Basically, I bet on Eubank very early when he was something like 5-4 against. And then was able to sort of hedge the play nearer the time because the prices changed so much. But yeah, that was... I certainly thought Eubank could stop Groves, which in hindsight was a ludicrous prediction. DeGale to beat Truax. I thought DeGale would smash Truax to pieces. I thought he'd stop him. And then I thought he'd stop him in the rematch as well. Again, painful losses. So there you go. I'm sure people will remember even more losses than those. I'm sure people will remember even more horrendous picks than those. But what can I say? Always game for a laugh, and always happy to have a little walk down memory lane. Off the top of my head, those are some of the most painful and memorable bad picks since starting this channel. Stiverne to beat Wilder, DeGale to beat Truax, Eubank to beat Groves, White to beat AJ, Price to beat Christian Hammer, Frankie Gavin to beat Sam Eggington, Nathan Cleverly to beat Bellew. Some howlers in there. But we learn from it. And, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but some of those losses have actually helped me learn as a boxing fan, and I acknowledge, I think what it was is I grew up with the sort of Audley Price era. And I think that probably taught me a painful lesson that just because someone's 6'6", just because someone knocks out a load of journeymen, just because someone's got an Olympic medal around their neck, it doesn't mean they're going to be a world champion. So, when Audley was running through people, when David Price was running through people, at the start I was probably a youngster on the hype train, And I think their careers taught me a painful lesson there. But I think, looking back on it, maybe I went too far the other way. Then I saw Joshua as a young fighter, again knocking out a load of journeymen, again a monster, big puncher, great physique, again got that Olympic medal around his neck, all the hype, same with Wilder. And I remember thinking, okay, don't get taken in like you did with Audley, don't get taken in like you did with David Price. And when I started seeing flaws in their hot game, like thinking how static and robotic a young Joshua was, thinking how defensively inept a young Wilder was, I was too quick to write them off. You know, I really was too quick to write them off because I think I was still reeling from the Price and Harrison careers, if you like. So maybe it's taught me that the right opinion to have is a halfway house, you know, and expect that just because these amateur medalists are, you know, still raw and still need to improve, that doesn't mean they need to be written off. You know, looking at a guy like Joe Joyce, for example, this time I've been much more in the middle ground on Joe Joyce. You haven't seen me make videos saying that he's going to be a dominant world heavyweight champion. You also haven't seen me make videos saying, I want to write him off because he's too slow. You can't write someone off just because of one attribute. It's something I've learned. And, yeah, let's see where it takes us. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that video. Let me know. Let me know of any I've missed. Please leave your comments in the section below. As ever, hit the thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for supporting what I'm doing. Cheers for tuning in.